And welcome to the Authors Hour. My name is Fred Zerm. I represent the Friends of the Chautauqua Writers Center. We're the sponsoring organization of this weekly event. We also sponsor a few other weekly events. On Sundays at 5 o'clock up in the Pros Room on the second floor, we have an open mic for writers 18 years old and older. Get about 5 minutes most weeks to read from your work. On Tuesdays, we sponsor what's called an informal critique at 1:15, right after the Poetry Brown Bag up in the Poetry Room. If you bring 10 copies just to be safe, you get to share it with your peers and a published writer, often me, but this week I think it'll be a different published writer that'll guide the discussion of your work. And as I said, the Authors Hour every Thursday. When it gets to be halftime, I'll talk about some of the special upcoming annual events. But let's get to our first reader in alphabetical order. An avid traveler who has visited every continent, Nancy Brown Diggs has lived in France, participated in language immersion homestay programs in Japan and Mexico, and volunteered in Ecuador, Romania, and Haiti. Interesting combination. Her long interest in other cultures is reflected by her PhD in Eastern Asian Studies, by her language skills, French, Spanish, German, and Japanese, and by the books she has written, which include Breaking the Cycle, How Schools Can Overcome Urban Challenges, Hidden in the Heartland, The New Wave of Immigrants and the Challenge to America, Looking Beyond the Mask, When American Women Marry Japanese Men, and Steel Butterflies, Japanese Women and the American Experience. Most recently, having authored books on other cultures, she decided to write about one closer to Appalachian or Appalachian, you can take your choice, never dreaming that it was her own, that the roots of those long forgotten ways could run so deep. The result, In Search of Appalachia. And I'll mention the publisher for that one since it's the recent one, Hamilton, Roman, and Littlefield. I give you Nancy Brown Diggs.
Introduction. Everybody hear me okay? Yes. Yes, is that better? Little Abner, Beverly Hillbillies, Dukes of Hazzard, Hee-Haw, Deliverance, Justified, Buckline, Hillbillies, Rednecks, Crackers, Clodhoppers, Ridge Runners, Dump Jumpers, Briars. How did millions of people who value family, honesty, loyalty, faith, independence, character, and country, for whom people are more important than things, ever become pariahs in their own land? Aren't those traits that all Americans aspire to? Was it when the writers of the early 20th century chose to look at Appalachians as colorful outsiders, inferior because of their isolation? Was it when the timber interests destroyed the forest and industrial giants rationalized exploitation by saying that such primitive people had to be brought into the modern world, no matter the means? Or was it when the government forced the exile of thousands of families from their homesteads because, after all, the people were culturally or biologically inferior and had to be saved? Or maybe it was when the media decided that the mountain people were the only group that could be safely mocked without fear of recrimination. Then John Sheldon Reed, hillbillies appeared to be the last acceptable ethnic group. Having written several books that touched on other cultures, I thought it was time to look at one closer to my own. Geographically, that is. Yes, my family roots were in Kentucky, but I was well-educated, well-traveled, and able to speak 5 languages, and so surely not like those people. But surprise, Appalachians are not like those people either, and those aren't the people I remember from a Kentucky childhood. When I hear that rural accent, all those shortened eyes, the Indian scenes, the southern cases expresses the first vowel of words with more than one syllable, tension, humble, deep choice. I have my Christian moments. I'm back at my grandparents' house, a place filled with love and down-home snow. These blankets hanging over the stove to dry, cold smoke, coffee. In the kitchen, the aunt and uncle sit around the table drinking coffee, laughing and talking, or rather shouting as they're all of them deaf, until late at night. In the morning, I'll wake up in the feather bed to the sound of women's sweet, forceful voices and the smell of biscuits and bacon. Summers meant the odor of kerosene, which we lathered on to keep the chickens off, before picking blackberries for Mammy's cobbler. And yes, we called her Mammy, a term of English, possibly Irish origin, long before Al Cappy existed. In my earliest memories, she would get water from the spring, heat iron on the stove, and warn us children away from the bucket of lime she used for making soap. In the winter, we'd sneak sugar lumps from the barrel in Pappy's general store, slipping past the farmer playing checkers on the pot-bellied stove. And I have a photograph, several photographs of Mammy and Pappy. In writing In Search of Appalachia, I would meet many who didn't think this as a stereotype, including bluegrass superstar Ricky Skaggs, millionaire businessmen, greatest generation veterans, educators, those who earned their doctorates and law degrees, and those who worked with their hands to feed their families. The people I met were more like the Waltons than the Beverly Hillbillies, more Sergeant York than Private Gomer Pyle. I found that the people from the hills, shaped by history and geography, have many valuable qualities of which they, and we, can be proud. Appalachian culture forms many of the characteristics considered typically American today. Our independence, our self-reliance, and our patriotism and dedication to service, especially military. What's more, millions of Americans still feel this influence. What are we talking about when we say Appalachia? The Appalachian Regional Commission, established in 1965 to research and overcome some of the problems in the hills, designates these sections of the country as Appalachia. All of West Virginia, parts of Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Mississippi, Maryland, and even a small part of western New York State, that's Chautauqua County. All the land covered by the Appalachian Mountain Range, which equals an area of 205,000 square miles. With a population of over 25 million, it has as many people as all of the Scandinavian countries combined, twice as many as Greece, Belgium, Portugal, and the Czech Republic, respectively. And it equals the number of people in such troublesome places as Yemen, North Korea, and Afghanistan. That's a lot of Americans to be disrespecting, and there are many more throughout the country that can claim its heritage. Appalachian values have a long pedigree, dating back to influences centuries ago and thousands of miles away. Or we could even say eons ago, where the landscapes have a part in forming the character of those from the mountains. In this book, we'll look at some of the reasons, the sticks and carrots, which led the early immigrants to risk the perilous voyage to America. And perilous it was on tiny, crowded ships, some not much larger than a double-wide trailer. We'll explore what happened when they got here, how and why settlers moved into the mountains, how our Appalachian ancestors shaped the country, and how the traits carried from faraway places in distant era continue to affect lives today, for better or worse. The Appalachian people are not just the descendants of those who left the British Isles, the huddled masses from northern England, lowland Scotland, and northern Ireland. The hills have long been populated by Native Americans, Germans, Italians, and other Europeans, as well as African Americans. But it is the group that constitutes the core of our culture, most of whom are Scotch-Irish, that will be the focus of this book, for that is the culture that has left its mark most in In Salem, Massachusetts, tourist crowd at the Witch Museum, the Pirate Museum, the Psychic Museum, the Wax Museum. Busy pedestrian Essex Street is lined with shops that sell witches' capes and pointed hats to fit all ages, babies and children, even dogs. Just a short distance away, though, there's a quiet and somber place, one that calls for a quite different mood from the festivity of Salem's tourist attractions. Near the entrance to the old Burying Point Cemetery stands the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, dedicated by Ely Bell, who wrote, "Only we remember will be worthy of redemption." 20 stone benches display the names of each of those executed in the hysteria of 1692. Many visitors leave flowers or notes to honor those innocent victims. A few feet away, the cemetery is filled with ancient tombstones, whose death heads, angels' wings, funeral urns, and weeping willows are almost obliterated with age. Among the fading markers, there's a different, much newer headstone that has replaced the original wooden cross. A ship in full sail is depicted above the inscription, William Cash, born 1625, Fife, Scotland, died 1690, Salem, Massachusetts, master mariner, captain, and master of brigantine, good intent. Sometimes visitors leave flowers or notes here, too, and so do I. Thank you, Captain, I write, for making me an American. My great-grandmother was a Cash, I explained, just in case. The Cash family must be typical of so many that left Britain to start over in America. Genealogists tell us that Captain William, after bringing shiploads of immigrants from his native Scotland to the new land, decided that he too would immigrate. Later, he would bring his nephew, also named William, to America. Captain Cash convinced his namesake that Massachusetts was no place for an ambitious young man. Virginia, which then included Kentucky and of course West Virginia, was a land of opportunity, and so young William headed to its greener pastures. Soon the Cash family, in accord with the biblical injunction to go forth and multiply, would spread throughout the country. Like many families of the day, they would have 8, 9, even 10 or more children, and almost all would live until adulthood. Like many other people whom Colin Wood has called borderlanders in his book, American Nations, some would take the great wagon road that led from Pennsylvania down through Maryland and through the Shenandoah Valley to reach the Carolinas. Branching off the great wagon road in western Virginia, the Wilderness Trail, marked by Daniel Boone in 1775, led through the Cumberland Gap to Kentucky and the Ohio River. After the Revolution and the defeat of the region's Cherokee and Shawnee tribes, between 200,000 and 300,000 people would take this land. By the fourth generation, Cash descendants were among those who had moved into Kentucky, and by the sixth, Cashes had headed into Missouri and Oklahoma, Texas and Tennessee, North Carolina, Alabama, and New Mexico. Cash men fought in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, and all the other wars involved in the country. One John Cash was a great admirer of Pancho Villa and helped supply the Mexican revolutionaries with guns. At the same time, unknown to John Cash, his distant cousin Ray, the singer Johnny Cash's father, was serving on the border under General Pershing, tracking Pancho Villa in order to punish him for an incursion that claimed American lives. To look at the Cash family history is to look at the history of America. Some would prosper, others would not. My great-grandmother, Mary Elizabeth Cash, and her husband, Isaac Carlton, did well enough to send their daughter, my grandmother, to college, actually more like a finishing school, and to let their son leave the farm and seek gold in Alaska, which he didn't find. Not all the numerous branches of the Cash clan did as well as those in Kentucky. Johnny Cash's great-grandfather, whose forebears had left Virginia for Georgia, lost his plantation to Sherman's troops in the Civil War. The family then left Georgia to homestead in Arkansas, farming and taking whatever work they could find when times were tough. As Johnny would say later, Daddy had a lot, but he didn't have money. It was a hard life working in the fields and hoeing cotton, but one thing their family did have was music. From the first, the Cash family would have been familiar with the songs that Captain William had heard back in Scotland, like 1916 to 1918, Englishman Cecil Sharp, among others, songwriters, travels around Appalachia, transcribing the many ballads from the old country that he felt had been preserved in Mount Isolation. Ricky Skaggs was surprised by how much he was familiar on his first trip to Ireland, he told me. I know the first time I ever went to Dublin, he said, I went to this picket, they call it a cave, and after our show was finished, we went to this place, and I tell people that when I walked in, I thought I died in all the Eastern Kentucky. There was so much to sing. And the music, that was the thing that blew my mind. How much of the music I understood and that I knew, but it was by different names. They might have changed the name of the thing after it came to America, but how much of the music that I recognized. It was a language that I could understand, It was a wonderful thing. And then as people moved across the country, as the mountain people were forced by lack of jobs to move farther and farther from the hills, the music evolved until there were perhaps 24 or more permutations of what we would call country music. And Johnny Cash was the master of them all. He could do hillbilly, rockabilly, gospel, outlaw. And he would perform in the poor neighborhoods of Appalachian settlers in the big industrial cities of the north. He would perform all over the world, actually, and even in Japan, where country music had been brought by American soldiers after World War II, and where it is still quite popular. I interviewed a most unexpected expert on country music in Japan named Michael Simonovsky. He was Lithuanian Jewish heritage, born in Zimbabwe, grew up in England, and now teaches at a university in Chautauqua. But it was Scotland that held a special place in Johnny Cash's heart. So that he once by chance happened to sit next to someone on a plane who told him that he was from Scotland and that he knew of many places with the Cash family name. And so Johnny became interested in his geology. He traced back his roots back until to Scottish royalty and learned about Captain William Cash too. And it was said that he had an almost spiritual connection with Scotland. He would visit Scotland at least 3 more times, and after his death, his daughter Roseanne would continue the connection, making frequent visits to sites. According to Roseanne Cash, going further back into our Celtic past, made my father realize that this was where he derived his tone of voice, the mournful quality of his music, and it was that sense of place and time that was passed on to him and then on to me. And so the story of the Cash family has come full circle.
Thank you, Nancy, for that, both historical and personal view. And I must admit, made me feel a little guilty when I directed You Can't Take It With You. I changed the African American servants to country, one stereotype or another in Copa. A few announcements about special annual events. On July 17th from 12 to 2 on Vester Plaza, we will have our annual book fair, what we call the Authors Among Us book fair. So it features Chautauquan authors. I know Deb has signed up, Nancy is thinking of it, and maybe Kevin's thinking of it too. I don't know. Okay. But is there any other authors either in the audience or that you know of that would like to be part of that? Visit our webpage, www.chq.org, then /FCWC for information about the book fair or any other events I mentioned today. On July 27th is the Favorite Poem Project at 5 o'clock in the Hall of Philosophy. That was started by poet laureate Robert Kinsey in general, but also in particular here at Chautauqua. He visited bestseller writer. We also sponsor the annual writing contest. The deadline for that is July 31st. It's open to writers of all ages. We have a young writers category as well. So if you or a spouse or a child or grandchild or dare I say great grandchild writes, please encourage them to take part. Our next reader, author, is Deb Pines, an award-winning New York Post headline writer and former reporter. Is the author of 8 Amy Goldman murder mystery novels and 1 novelist, all set in Chautauqua, where they are bookstore top sellers. My grandma, special studies teacher and lover of walking the Chautauqua perimeter, Deb lives in New York City with her husband, Dave, and she'll be reading from her latest work. Deb Pines.
Thank you so much for having me here. I feel in such a literary environment, a little bit like the vaudeville dancer ushered onto the Broadway stage, because what I'm reading from is genre fiction. It's meant to entertain. It's not as highbrow as some of the stuff normally here. But what I'm reading from is the 9th book in my mystery series. And so in some ways, what I did was the same as my other books. And in some ways, it's different because this book, I decided to make a reimagining of an Agatha Christie story. It's not one of the most famous stories, but it's called A Murder is Announced. Her book is set in Chipping, Cleghorn, British fictional village post-World War II. Mine is set in another charming village known as Chautauqua. And so I'm going to just read chapter 1, and then if anybody has questions, I would welcome questions from anyone. So the chapters I've titled partly because I love to do headlines and partly because Agatha Christie had headlines and titles for her chapters. So this one is chapter 1, Yikes, a Murder. It was an ordinary Chautauqua Sunday, most people thought, until they went online. The sky was gray blue, the lake was bathtub calm, birds chitter-chattered in the sugar maples, the bell tower did its thing, chiming every quarter hour. Early bird Chautauquans were out enjoying a walk, a round of golf, reading, jogging, and the like, relieved that the in-person 2021 summer season hadn't been like 2020's, canceled due to COVID. They were happy also that it was shaping up to be enjoyable and uplifting and a little different, but not too different from prior years at the 147-year-old quirky, churchy, Victorian cottage-filled summer art community in far western New York. Matilda Willoughby, unable to sleep, reached for her phone and reading glasses. After checking her email, she did what many Chautauquans do first thing. She browsed the grapevine. Someone was looking for a ride to Buffalo Airport for their niece. Someone else was looking for a reliable plumber. Someone else was giving away a red tricycle. Someone else was selling a kayak. Someone else wanted a, quote, strong young person to help unload their car at 10 a.m. on Wednesday. The next post said, a murder is announced. Matilda stared. Confused, she moved on to the details. All vaccinated Chautauquans are welcome. When? Sunday, July 18 at 9:15 p.m. after the Sacred Song service. Where? Merrill Manor, I made that up, and the address to 6 Root Avenue, ground floor, masks optional. My goodness, Matilda thought, what nonsense. Evelyn Willoughby, Matilda's very elderly mother, was snoring under an Amish quilt in the single bed next to Matilda's. She needed her rest, so Matilda let her be. Still, the item was upsetting. Sunday, July 18th was that very day. Merrill Manor was where they were staying, in the same room her mom had rented for 32 summers. When the manor sold in May, the new owner, Betsy Kowalski, a Wall Street big shot, let Evelyn stay. The sale, nonetheless, was upsetting, and now this, Matilda thought. She took a screenshot and sent it to Betsy, adding, "See this on the grapevine? Is this some kind of joke?" Across the street, a few doors down, Agnes Hammerly was pouring coffee for her husband, Jeremiah, a retired judge. Jeremiah enjoyed reading an actual physical newspaper, while Agnes, his third wife, bustled about in her leopard print robe and slippers. Between bites of bacon, eggs, and toast, Jeremiah flipped through his 2-day-old New York Times. Agnes stirred whole milk into his coffee. Frothed nut pods, a non-dairy diet substitute, went in hers. Seated across from the judge, she browsed her email and then the grapevine. "OMG," she said, "listen to this, hun." Jeremiah kept reading. "Hun," she repeated, "did you hear me?" "What?" he asked in a bored tone. "It's a weird item in the grapevine that I don't read the Daily